think of a BC mill, we have a sawmill, we have dry kilns, we have a planer. Kind of stops there for most mills, right?
Yeah,
We're making commodity dimension lumber for the U.S. market, one size basically, a nominal 2-inch lumber. So it doesn't create a lot of imagination. Whereas in Europe, the markets are all different. Every market they go to has a different specification, different grade, different length, different width. And so they have to produce what the market wants.
Exactly.
And so what they do is they merchandise the logs first. They put it through a big called a merchandiser, where the logs go in and they're all scanned and dropped off into bins.
Yeah.
And then when they go into their mill, these logs are all designed for one product, and they can put them through in a batch, and almost no fall down. And it's a great way to get your business, and you get all the upside as well.
Innovative primary, I call it.
Yeah, exactly.
And that made them uniquely different, where they're not relying on one product, dimension lumber, into the marketplace, and they become very, very effective on it, and they're very, very successful. Hello, I'm John Brink, and we are podcasting on the Brink from downtown Prince George, British Columbia, Canada. In particular, northern British Columbia. Prince George is northern British Columbia. It's a city of about 82,000 people, lots of forest all around us, and a very, very special region. I call it paradise, really. Within 50 miles, 100 lakes. An absolute beautiful place. Today, our podcast is about the BC forest industry in crisis and beyond, likely because of the fear of tariffs and duties, and all those things have made it extremely difficult for our forest industry. And today, we have a very, very special guest. His name is RUSS TAYLOR. I've known Russ probably for about 30 years or so.
Probably more.
Maybe even more. He has been in the business. His company's name is RUSS TAYLOR Globally, has been in the business for 45, nearly 50 years, and all over the place. And he was involved in the forest industry in northern British Columbia at one point as a forester for Northwood Pulp in Houston.
Correct.
And then from there on in was involved in a number of other ones and reports, and I'll get you to maybe kind of walk us through that if you can. Russ, take us back to you studied in British Columbia and at UBC,
yes.
I believe, and then from there on in, maybe just take us forward from there.
Sure. Well, I'll just do a quick overview. I graduated in 1974 with a degree in forestry, and I was stationed for Northwood in Houston, BC, which at that point in time, they just bought out the bankrupt Bathurst Bowater mill that was built, I think it was like 1972. So it was like a brand new mill, and
the biggest one in the world.
And it was the biggest one in the world, and it's tended to be the biggest one in the world, or one of the 4 or 5 biggest mills in the world. So it's quite a mill. And so I worked there for 5 years. I had the bug to go traveling. I went traveling around the world for about 18 months, and then went back and took an MBA, and then went working for Interfor, a lumber company on the BC coast, and worked for them for 7 years, sales, marketing, custom cutting, remanufacturing, a lot of different things. It was
substantially on the island, right?
No, on the mainland.
On the mainland, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And that's where the mills were for Interfor.
Yeah.
And then after that, I had worked as a consultant in my MBA summer, and I had a request to join a consulting firm, so I did. I joined Charlie Woodman's consulting company for about 4 years. Then
it was very popular at the time.
Yeah, exactly, and learned a lot. But at that time, I realized anybody can do this, so I did. I went out on my own, and within about 6 months, I was too busy, and I hired someone part-time, and then 6 months later, full-time, and and I went from there. So we've done a lot of consulting work on markets, on products, starting kind of with the Southern Hemisphere. I mean, we always did North America, but we went into New Zealand and did some work there and helped them. We're helping them find markets for their products in Asia and in Europe.
Yeah.
So we managed to do that, and then from there we decided to go to Chile, and we met some companies and did some work for them, and then went on to Brazil. Same story.
Amazing.
Yeah, and then we got a phone call the day before Christmas Eve one year in the late 90s saying, we need a report you've got, and can you do some consulting work? So that was in South Africa, and in the moldy and millwork area. So that was our largest project at the time, and so we did that project, and then after that we came back to Australia and did a big project there, and so we kind of got the Southern Hemisphere figured out. But then everything was there wasn't a lot of growth left because we'd done all the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
So we looked at a map of the world and we said, where haven't we been yet? This is about 2000. And we said, well, we haven't been to China, we haven't been to Russia, and we haven't been to Europe to look at the sawmills there. So
Exactly.
that year we had trips to all three regions and got a consulting project in Russia, got a consulting project in China, and it just took off from there. We did a multi-client study, which is a report that we sell. That was for Europe. That's how we paid our bills in Europe. And then I got more connected with the industries in China and Europe and in Russia.
Yeah.
And that just built out from there. So I basically had a global perspective that just through projects, and you learn things and you piece things together, and that was sort of my learning on the job sort of thing.
So you spend a lot of time in the airplanes.
Yeah, yes, my wife will tell you that too. So, but it was a lot of times it was one trip and down maybe 10 days, maybe 2 weeks, then back.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
But it was a lot of flights and a lot of away from home sort of thing. Try to do our terms of reference, wherever that was.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So it gave you an amazing amount of experience on the global market, really.
That's right.
And then, in particular, then you got more involved in Europe, in particular Northern Europe, Sweden, Finland, Norway to a certain extent maybe, and Russia then, and Germany.
Germany, Austria, Czech Republic, yeah.
Yeah, all of that, right?
Yep.
And that the other part that is unique about it, because I was involved in the industry in Holland 10 years before I came to Canada, and my dad managed a lumber company for a company called William Pond, which was the largest importer of lumber in Western Europe.
Right.
And he managed one of their companies, and I was involved with them. Spent some time in Sweden, Central Europe, and but it always reminds me of, from that period, Russ, is that species in Sweden, in particular, very similar to what we have in northern British Columbia.
Yep, spruce pine forests, absolutely. Yeah.
And then the other part that I find interesting about it is that that was 60, 70 years ago when I was involved there. They had similar problems that developed in Sweden as we have had here. Beetle kill to a certain extent, and then they had too much capacity, making too many products but the market was not ready for it, so they got very much up and down.
Yes.
Then they changed a number of things. Makeup of the industry in Sweden, obviously different than it is here. I believe most of the lumber timber in the Sweden is public, and then a smaller portion is government, 10 or 15 in that area.
Yeah, I think that's about right. I think it might be 2/3, 1/3, but I'm not
Yeah.
sure. They have cooperatives as well, so the private land owners have a cooperative, and then they are managed as one, so they can get volumes to the mills in their group.
Very well structured, right? The
Yes.
organizations around it.
Very, very much so.
And it manages the market, it manages the relationships.
Yeah, and they also, what they do, John, that we don't see that much here, is they manage the forests.
Yeah.
They manage it for the long term, for thinning, for silviculture regimes, and then and when they harvest it, it's put back in production. And And to some degree, with all that management, they don't have forest fires.
Exactly. And then they may do as many as 3 cycles of intensive forestry in terms of managing the forest for results, and they may grow probably, you probably know better than I do, but I always kind of think of maybe 50% more volume of timber per hectare than we do.
Yeah, because when you thin, you release the trees that are left behind. They can grow more rapidly, not constrained. So you get the first crop. Sometimes they do a second thinning, depending, and they get more really good quality logs out of it that are higher in volume, so per hectare.
And then the other thing that I think is unique in that market, and I kind of look at it a lot of times, looking at us going forward as what should it look like, what could it look like, is that they were, when I was involved in Holland, we bought coastal loads of lumber, all rough lumber, all different dimensions that they were ordering, but not many finished products. And then in the last 20, 30, 40 years, they started changing to innovative primary in combination with intensive secondary. That's what the industry is today.
Correct.
And where they are finding value-added products in the marketplace.
Yeah, they do a variety of products. I mean, when I think of a BC mill, we have a sawmill, we have dry kilns, we have a planer. Kind of stops there for most mills, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We're making commodity dimension lumber for the U.S. market, one size basically, a nominal 2-inch lumber. So it's it doesn't create a lot of imagination. Whereas in Europe, they have to. The markets are all different. Every
Exactly.
market they go to has a different specification, different grade, different length, different width. And so they have to produce what the market wants.
Exactly.
And so what they do is they merchandise the logs first. They put it through a big called a merchandiser, where the logs go in and they're all scanned and dropped
Exactly.
off into bins.
Yeah.
And then when they go into their mill, these logs are all designed for one product,
Yeah.
and they can put them through in a batch, and almost no fall down. And
No.
it's a great way to get your business, and you get all the upside as well.
Innovative primary, I call it.
Yeah, exactly.
And that made them uniquely different, where they're not relying on one product dimension, lumber, into the marketplace, and they become very, very effective on it, and they're very, very successful. In terms of log prices in Europe, if we look at, although Central Europe tends to have different timber, although it's still whitewood to a certain extent, but it's different compared to northern Sweden, Finland, Norway, and to a certain extent Russia. That's very similar to ours, but they found certain products for that particular market.
Exactly. And then I know one of my favorite mills I like to visit. I suppose I can name it. It's a Storo Enzo.
We dealt with them.
Yeah, there you go. They're big
I've been there.
integrated company. Yes,
Big company.
They have some very interesting mills. They have a mill in Ybbs, Austria, on the Danube, and that is the biggest capacity sawmill in the world. Now they don't have the logs to run 3 link lines, so they only tend to run 2 at a time. But it's still a big mill, and then they make all these value-added products. They've got regular kilns, they've got thermally modified kilns. They'll make finger jointed stock for Japan. They'll make KVH lumber, which is used for glulam and big timbers, and they have a line that does that as well. A line for doing finger joint products for Japan, sometimes glued, but finger joint for sure. And then a big beam plant they have as well. And then they're not done. They added a pellet mill, and then they added a cross-laminated timber plant as well. So it's, and so guess what? Biggest mill, one of the biggest mills in Europe, they don't sell any lumber. They're selling all these finished products.
Exactly.
Not commodity lumber. They're selling mainly specialty lumber.
Yeah, and so that is unique, and that is different. That's where I see us in the future, going in that direction. I always remember when I was there working for William Pond, and so then Canada has always been special to me, and probably in another week or so I celebrate April the 12th. That's when the city that I was born in northeastern Holland was liberated by the Canadians, and
Right.
and it made such an impression on me that I always knew from that point forward, 5 years old, that once I grew up, I would go to the land of my heroes, Canada. And that's
right.
what I wanted to do.
Yeah,
And
well
then my
done.
grandfather was a master carpenter, my dad worked in the lumber. And so then the other dream that I had is build my own lumber mill.
Sure, exactly.
And so, and then I wanted to start from the bottom up. I wanted to learn
Yep,
everything.
exactly.
But when I worked for William Pond, and already was kind of in a small way involved, very close to management, because my dad worked there as a manager. We always got a charge out of every so often the Canadians would come and visit us, and a lot of times those were sawmill operators from the interior of British Columbia. And we were all excited about it. We loved the Canadians, obviously. And then they would come down and they would try to convince us already then to buy houses like they built them here, stick
Right,
build it.
right.
And they wanted to sell then dimension lumber.
Right, of course.
And it was a little bit of a joke by us, is because we already knew that they would do that when the U.S. market was down.
Exactly.
As soon as that came back up again, they were back in the U.S. market until the next downturn.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that then really never happened. And so that's what I always knew, and that's what I saw when I came here in 1965, when all the mills were operating and coming with nothing, a suitcase.
Yes, I know your story, absolutely, yes.
Yeah, it was nothing.
Famous story.
And then the first job that I got is being a cleanout man in one of the mills, and then became a supervisor, and I could not believe, initially standing there looking at the burner conveyors, how much of the timber would go up into the burner.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that was shocking to me, the quality of fiber here was so similar to what I had seen in Holland of the wood that we bought from Sweden, Russia, and some others, in particular Sweden, that it was so similar. And the amazing thing about it is that's what happened then. And in a way, I think it's still somewhat the same today. It's not today because a lot of the mills are gone now, but that's what we were doing right up to that point. Is what we were doing is basically making dimension lumber, sell it into the United States, and that's what we did.
Yep.
And then when we changed policy, and then value added, we didn't really do value added. Didn't even talk about it then. And then I started talking about it more in the mid 80s, in saying that to stimulate value added manufacturing, we need to have access to fiber.
Right.
And that became very, very difficult. So then we started a program, small business program, where they took a substantial portion of the AAC and designated it to value-added companies. That was successful to a certain extent, but it had potential, but it never really had the support of the primaries. And
Yes.
then when Gordon Campbell came in 2002, 2003, they eliminated that program pretty much. And what happened then as well is most of the secondary started disappearing. The other thing that they did is saying, but what we have to do is we have to find a new market for our lumber, and China is the place to go, and some of the other places. So they, and Korea and other places, and they made a lot of money available to organizations like COFI, the BC Lumber Trade Council, set up offices down
Yep.
there and create new markets. But most people didn't realize is that, and you're the expert, but what happened is the Chinese are bottom feeders, and they only are interested in low grades mainly.
Mainly.
And
Yeah.
all the lumber that was used for further manufacturing here was shipped to China. We have still a low-grade manufacturing plant that remanufacturing plant has been empty since 2005 because all the lumber, low-grade lumber, disappeared.
That's right. Yeah, and I know with China, they used, I mean, it was a wonderful story. I remember the stories of the various forest ministers saying, we've got this market called China, the volumes are going straight up. And then you go into the field and you go, wait a minute, it's all low grade, it's all economy lumber, it's all utility lumber, and they use it in concrete forming, a lot of it, and they use it once, maybe twice, and then they throw it away or burn it.
Yeah.
That's the end use. It's a
Yeah.
temporary use, and some went into pallets and packaging, and some of the higher grades did sort of work their way into the furniture sector, but again, the Achilles heel we have in BC, which I see over and over and over again, is we go to markets like China and say, here's what we have to sell you, and the Europeans go there and say, what do you need?
Exactly.
And so what they do is they can do metric sizes, metric lengths, kind of furniture grades, low grades, and they can give you exactly what you want. So guess what? They have a good business.
Exactly. And the same applies to Japan. Because what I always say, the way I see the future of the primary manufacturing as we go forward, and the industry is now changing and has to change in a different direction, that we will see innovative primary means less people, more technology, likely less volume, and that at least 50% of the lumber that is manufactured will go up the value chain. 25% of the lower grades for further manufacturing, 25% of the higher grades
Right.
going to directions like Japan and other directions up for further manufacturing
Yes.
down here. And that's how I see the future of
Yeah.
the industry.
And that was part of your vision, I think, to acquire some of the Canfor mills and create them into that model.
Exactly. And I'm glad that you mentioned that actually, because that's exactly what I wanted to do. I could not believe, with all the operations that we have here, we have a mill here in Prince George, one in Vanderhoof, one in Houston, and when initially the notice was given that obviously the industry was going through a tough time because of high cost of fiber and a number of other political issues in BC, that they had to make a decision as to, did make a decision, would they invest further in the industry or would they make other decisions? To my surprise, one of the decisions they made is to shut down the Houston mill because of high cost. I can understand it because it's an old mill and it was high cost likely. And then they plan to build a new mill, highly efficient and different, smaller volume. And then obviously the decision was made by the directors that they not only made the decision they would not build a mill in Houston but shut it down altogether, and then at the same time made the decision to shut down Polar, the sawmill in Bear Lake.
Correct.
And so when that happened, it affected our access to fiber.
Absolutely.
And so I made then an attempt to acquire the Polar mill. First because tenure was not available, I wanted to make a deal with First Nations, and then we operate the sawmill.
Right.
And so I made an offer on Canfor, but they then indicated no, they were not interested in that, but they would only do a deal if it also sold the tenure. I said, okay, I'll make an offer on the tenure. So I
Right.
did that, and so on and on and on. And then it didn't take much longer than that when we were in the process of making an offer formally about that. They shut down Fort St. John, Vanderhoof, and then obviously there was not going to be any new mill in Houston.
Exactly.
And so then that put us in the position saying, well, I have to do something, and obviously it will be encouraged by government, but likely will be encouraged by First Nations, because UNDRIP had happened, and they likely would get 20% of the AEC, and obviously was looking for sawmills, because why have AEC if there's no more mills? And I thought that'd be the way to go. So I tried to make an offer on Fort St. John, Polar, and Vanderhoof, and it became then increasingly more difficult to deal with Canfor because they were in transition. Don Kane was leaving.
Yes.
David Calabrico was leaving, and so they had a whole new management team. And so I'm still in a position where I'm still trying to acquire the sawmill site in Houston, as well as the Vanderhoof mill, without the tenure, because there's no tenure in Vanderhoof, with that mill. And I made an offer to them, offered them the same price as they sold the tenure in Mackenzie to the McLeod Lake Band for a price that was higher than theirs, actually.
Okay.
And then I'm also working closely with the Wet'suwet'en Wet'en hereditary chiefs, and looking at how can we work with them together and to acquire the tenure, and then for us to operate a mill, create it into a model, innovative primary in combination with intensive secondary.
Right. It sounds, this is now what Minister Parmar, the forest minister, is looking for. He realizes we can't rely on dimension lumber, not only with the U.S. market with tariffs, but also that's you don't get enough jobs out of the wood anymore. So he's trying to get more value and more jobs out of the wood, which is commendable. But then you need the investment around the lumber availability, and that becomes challenging because it's all one size. So you have to figure out what you're going to do with that feedstock to fit into markets that are going to be profitable, and that becomes the challenge.
And then the other asset that we have that is valuable, is critical, entrepreneurship. People like me that lay awake all night and saying, how do I do this? How can I make this work? And has experience. Like I've been in the industry, I started working when I was 12, actually 12 and a half. So I'm 84 now, so I've been in the industry. In lumber, I started out at 12 and a half as a furniture maker. And then, so I have lots of experience, and obviously lots of experience in value-added and further manufacturing. Started this company 50 years ago, and saying, but one of the problems that I found, and then was involved with the Council of Forest Industry for 40 years, was the vice chair of COFI and a director for 40 years. And finally I gave up on them because that it was obvious that further manufacturing, although they say they were supporting it, the decisions that were made by COFI basically are and I don't blame them for that. They have due players, and especially the bigger companies control coffee. Yeah. And the problem now that they have, in my opinion, is that I never quite know what flag should be on the table as they negotiate for trade agreements with the United States, because they are mainly in the BC Lumber Trade Council. Mainly, most of the volume is not located in BC.
It's in the south.
But it's in the south. And then I wonder whose agenda are they representing, and government is too close to them. In my opinion, I'm not trying to make Kofi angry. I'm simply saying what I said to them all along when I was the vice chair, is that I believe that Kofi, BC Lumber Trade Council, is going in the wrong direction unless they look around the world and follow innovative primary in combination with intensive secondary. We have to be First Nations has to be involved. We have intensive forestry, on and on. It's not reinventing the wheel.
Yeah, and I think that in some cases, though, if they really want to be successful going forward, well, this is my opinion, is you really need to then start with the logs, and you got to sort them and add value to the logs like a log merchandiser.
Exactly.
And then, I don't know if you can convert a dimension mill to metric sizes, but you would have the wood, the log quality to do that, and you could batch it up. So I mean, that's kind of what's missing, and that's what I see in Europe. I see it in South America, the same thing. One company in South America, they have one of these giant, expensive X-ray scanners. It's a massive machine, and they just put the logs. It's radiata pine. They put the logs through the log scanner, and all they want to do is direct the highest value log to one of 3 end uses. They have a high end, middle end, and low end, and that's all it does. And it's a huge investment, but it's called value-added logs, right? And now the logs are going to the right destination, no more guessing at what's inside the log, and they've been able to expand their products and markets incredibly. And because they've got these, I call it flexible use of their logs and adding value to the logs. So it's not a complicated business, but if you've never done that, and I don't know anybody in North America that has a log merchandise. There may be a few companies, maybe small ones. I think maybe a few small ones. And then when we try to import European technology with the log merchandisers, Interfor tried, they failed. Westar failed in the north as well. And those are the two, I believe those are the only 2 log merchandisers installed in North America. So, and there's one in the U.S. South as well, and that didn't work. So for some reason we couldn't do it, and so we go back to our old ways.
Yeah.
And now as a result, when I look at the data, like BC ships 77% of our lumber exports go to the U.S. 67% of our production goes to the U.S. So you want to put tariffs on, or countervailing or reciprocal tariffs or whatever it is, it's a huge barrier now, and that's your major market. The rest of the world, we send about 9% to China, 7% to Japan, but both of those markets are going down.
Exactly.
Demographics are down.
Yeah.
China's in a tailspin on the construction market. Other segments are actually growing a little bit, but there's a little bit of hope there, but slowly. And so they're caught with, now we need to diversify markets. And we got the rest of the world is like 6%. All the other countries is 6%. How can they increase that dramatically?
Exactly. Now, the other part that I say, Russ, saying that in government says, Premier Hibby says, well, I will find new markets, or we will find new markets for our products if the United States does that. I say, open your door. Open your door, look outside NBC. That is where your market is. Value-added manufacturing. How do you, I've been operating here for 50 years, not because of government, in spite of them.
That's right.
So because we are, at one point, we were able to, as the BC lumber value-added manufacturing sector, we were able to be involved in the negotiations of the duties, and we were able to negotiate in spite of Kofi and those guys that were just negotiating on the part of their interest, not so much value added,
right,
is where we were paying duties on the input volume, not on the,
correct.
The more value you add, the more duties you have to pay. And so, but then in 2016, I think, is when the last go around, that was not even talked about, and value-added manufacturers were not involved in the negotiations.
Right.
So now what we have is that if I look at people like ourselves, we pay 14.5% duty. The more value we add, the more duty we pay. So
right.
do the people down the coast that are,
Yep.
putting a lot of value. And then, by September or August, September, that the all others will go to 25.5%.
Correct.
Saying that if you're not even trying to represent the value-added manufacturers in your negotiations for duties with the United States, and I know it from the people that were negotiating on part of the government, they said they didn't even bring it up about
It's
value-added
just
manufacturing.
crazy.
And so those are some of the issues, and I will bring that up with the Minister of Forest when I'm podcasting yesterday, just to give him a direction, because that I agree with you. But first, what we have to do is we have to make sure we take care of our forest, that it becomes predictable in terms of how much forest do we have available, accessible, not so much the AAC, but how much of the timber will be made available. And I believe the Premier made a commitment of that will be 45 million cubic meters minimum. I don't know how much.
He didn't say when.
No, and that's the problem with it,
What's
right?
the problem?
And then the other part about it is that what will be the cost because there is so much bureaucracy around it for getting permits. If we have timber that we cannot be making available to our primary sector, that it is competitive with other regions, areas globally, then we will not attract investors. And it has to be predictable. We have to sort out. The government has to find ways in which they can work with First Nations. UNDRIP is part of the reality, and we are the lands are not censored, and it's still First Nations, and they have to be part of the discussion. But it starts with government having discussion with First Nations to create the understanding that we have to be predictable together in terms of attracting capital. That means we have to have forest that is predictable, not interaction and fighting between First Nations and government. Add to that communities, and on and on and on and on. Then we will not attract entrepreneurship, and we will not attract capital.
Well, the only good news is right now, when I still track competitiveness of sawmills in North America and Europe at a higher level than I used to. And when I'll be doing that tomorrow at this conference, the Kofi conference. I'm going to kind of share some of that information where, so at 14%, 14.4% duties that we have currently, mills are making money. Yeah. Finally, it's been a long time.
Yeah.
And at a 25% tariff, which sounds like that's off now, but if you add that next, now you're up to a much higher level, and the BC mills start to lose money. The rest of North America and Europe still makes money.
Yeah.
And then when you add in the final increased anti-dumping duty and countervailing duty at the end, towards the end of the year.
20.5,
Yeah, and so forth. Now the duties go from 14.4 to around 30. Add in the tariffs. If they come in at 25, you're at 55% penalty. Now you're the highest cost region in North America. Yeah. The U.S. mills are the most profitable. Surprise, surprise. And then the Eastern Canadian mills are sort of just slightly in a loss position. So BC will get hammered if all of those tariffs and duties come into play.
And with all due respect to my major operators, the Canfords, the Westphalians, the Interfords, and all the other ones in the Telcos, and all good friends, at least in my mind, that if you are under those circumstances that you played in front of me, have most of your representation in other areas other than BC, that includes Sweden potentially, but in particular the US Southeast, then I cannot have you sitting on the table that negotiates duties while most of your interest is in the areas that would benefit of the pain that I will have here. That's a conflict, and government has to recognize that, and they should.
Yeah, because if they're growing in the U.S. South and shrinking in BC, what's the reason to kind of push hard for a deal for BC? They're going to make it all up in the U.S. If the tariffs go on, they have a huge upside.
Exactly. And so those are issues that I believe are troubling, and so that when John Oregon made the announcement, I think it was in 2019, that Vancouver's coffee convention. I was still a member then, and he basically said, I had a lot of respect for him, basically said, that he will, unless industry starts being sensitive to the issues of old growth, First Nations, and value-added involvement in industry, then they will make changes. Then what was followed, I believe in 2021, I forget now exactly, was the intentions paper,
Right.
where he became more serious about it. They had labor speaking to it, First Nations speaking to it, and they asked me to, I thought there would be other primates speaking to it, but I spoke to it, and I said the future of the industry, and I'm supportive of old growth, but I relate to that as the big three is not what happened, they went too far with it. But that being said, that I believed it was going in the right direction. I support First Nations, and then stimulating value-added manufacturing, but the Kofi did, and that's why I left Kofi as after being there for 40 years, worked against involvement of value-added manufacturing and access to fiber. The first statement that was made by Kofi, a Kofi director, was, in the first meeting that I went to, that the timber, I want you guys to understand, the timber belongs to the primaries in this province, and no one is going to tell us who buys our lumber, whatever the price is.
Gotcha.
I said, I'm taking off my hat here as the vice chair of Kofi, and I said, we may as well go home. That's the position. And nothing has changed.
Yeah, yeah.
So so that's kind of where we are. So then, again, looking forward, we have such an amazing country, such an amazing province, and obviously on all the things that we have talked about, and all the things that can be and will have to happen as we go forward, then the next thing that happened in the last couple of months is the new President of the United States, Donald Trump, says that he loves, more than anything in the world, he loves tariffs.
Tariffs, yes.
And he's going to raise tariffs, and he will collect $6 trillion, wipe out all their deficits, and because he'd given far too much money, and on and all the nonsense that follows that.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, and then as we sit here today doing this podcast, this was the day in which, on April the 2nd, where the President of the United States showed the world the tariffs that he will charge them, including Canada. But at this point, because we have an agreement that was signed by the President of the United States then in his first go-around,
Right.
The
USMCA?
The USMCA, and that was formerly the NAFTA.
Correct.
That should exclude lumber companies from that at this point.
Yeah, exactly.
Technically speaking.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess the drama in all this is that he keeps pushing things on, pushing things off, creating, there's no uncertainty. How do you operate with all this uncertainty? And that's what operators are trying. Some of the traders I talked to, they said, I've had the quietest week in my career about 3 weeks ago when I couldn't sell prompt wood. I had nothing to sell, and waiting for the next deadline to appear. So the thing about Trump with tariffs, he doesn't fully understand, though, I don't think, how much of Canadian consumption of the forest products they consume. So lumber is 24% U.S. consumption. OSB is about 30%. You get up into some mechanical papers, it's about 40 to 50%. Pulp is over 50%, and newsprint is about 80% of total U.S. consumption. So if they want to print newspapers, and they want toilet paper,
And that only applies to lumber now, or lumber fiber related issues, right?
Yeah, well,
That
all the forest products exports.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the percent of U.S. consumption that our products represent. So it's
Exactly.
not like we don't need their products. That's what Trump says.
But he
Well,
says there is enough timber here, no worries about that. I did a picture of one, actually. I don't know if I got it here or not, but where it showed that, and you would make that point, I have it here someplace, but it shows they simply don't have the ability. They need to, in a normal market, they are short at least 25%.
Yeah, exactly.
dimension lumber.
And they don't have the labor to go in the woods. They don't have the management in the forestry Department of Forestry, because they just fired them all.
Yeah.
And then they don't have the workers that they've expelled to South America and Central America. So you have a great strategy, except where the workers going to come from, and then who's going to invest capital, not knowing if these tariffs are on again or off again. So yes, there's trees growing in the U.S. and yes, you can probably increase incrementally, and mills will increase production incrementally, but it's all temporary until they understand what the rules of the game are. If tariffs come off, all of a sudden now it's back to normal again, and what do? So they can't make investment decisions, no matter what Trump's theory is, and they need our products from Canada as well. So it's a real, I see it as a catch-22.
And then the other part about it, Russ, correct me if I'm wrong, what I'm saying is that the SPF lumber, spruce, pine, balsam, fir, that we manufacture is superior for working with than anything else that grows in the United States, especially southern yellow pine, which is basically growing on the old cotton fields, and
Yes.
and that doesn't even come close to comparing in quality to the lumber that we manufacture.
No, and that's exactly right. I mean, the southern yellow pine, it's heavy, it's dense, you can't nail it. I mean, there was almost like zero stud production in the U.S. South until the Canadian companies got down there and they started figuring out how to make studs, and they're making some studs. But the builders prefer Canadian lumber, even though right now it's priced at probably, U.S. South lumber is in the mid 400s, and the SPF would be selling in the mid 600s. So it's
Yeah.
a huge premium. They're still paying it.
Yeah, and so what I say with southern yellow pine, you have to drill it before you nail it.
Exactly.
So, and it's all crook and twist, and we
Yeah.
sell a lot of our finger joints into that market for that reason.
Yes, exactly.
Because there's no twist, no crook to it.
But I was approached by a media person. They said, "We've just learned that Western SPF is a preferred species for the builders in the U.S. South. They don't like southern yellow pine. Is that true?" I'm going, well, I knew that like 30, 40 years ago, but they're just now learning this stuff, the media, right? Because it's another headline, right? So,
Yeah.
But that's kind of what the market's always said, that they prefer Canadian spruce. European spruce is coming in too.
Yeah.
Same reason.
For all the same reasons,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So
Yeah.
it's uniquely different. So it's a product that will always be unique in the marketplace.
Yeah, exactly.
And so and that alone makes us very attractive. Now, looking at coming back to the President of the United States, Donald Trump, the announcement that he made today, obviously we were waiting for that all day long, and because he is the leader, he has very little opposition because he controls all three houses, or he controls the Supreme Court, the Senate, and the Congress, and the White House, obviously, and he's in control big time, and and there is a fear, not only if I would be in the United States in terms of investment, but also in other areas of the world. And it makes me wonder about, North America is special to me because I lived as a little boy through the Second World War. And to me, it always meant a lot that when the Americans and the Canadians and a lot of other countries, a number of other companies, landed in Normandy in the summer of 1944 to create freedom in Western Europe, and they did. And so I admired them for it, and I feel always that closeness to the Americans because they were there
Yeah.
together with the Canadians.
Exactly.
And still I feel a very close feeling to the people of the United States. And then looking forward in terms of, in particular, what will happen next. Is where they get alienated by the rest of the world.
Absolutely. Look what Canadians are doing right now. They're canceling plans to travel to the U.S. for holidays, for day trips. One of the borders, the volumes is down 50% since March in this year, March versus last year. It's because we're insulted about what's going on, and the so-called relationships that we thought we had are being taken away because of the president's agenda.
Yeah, and then looking back even to, from my perspective, then in 1947, the Marshall Plan came in to rebuild Europe, and it was again driven by the Americans and changed Europe, and that has to be that always the way I look at the United States as the leader of the democratic rule in the world.
Yeah.
And that's how I've always looked at them, still looked at them up to now. And then, at the same time, by comparison, say, we don't want to be like Putin is in the Ukraine, the Middle East, China, Russia, obviously, Southern Europe, Venezuela, Cuba, and the other places, and saying that's, and then saying the Constitution of the United States and the structure is very, very solid because it starts with we the people, and I admire that about them. I'm worried though.
Yeah, it's not about we the people anymore, is it?
Is it? And
No.
that's is scary.
Yeah.
And it should be scary to my friends in the United States and around the world. And I'm afraid. Where are we going?
Oh,
in what
absolutely.
direction?
Yeah, I mean, with the tensions on, if Canadians are getting upset, we're usually pretty polite and resistant, but we're getting upset. The rest of the world's going to be getting upset too. Europe's been hit with 20% reciprocal tariffs now.
Yeah.
We all thought we were out. We were allies. They were allies. But no, it's kind of like, no, you're going to get punished, and that's part of the problem.
In Europe, the EU, very, very powerful, structurally, economically, the largest group in the world, much larger than China or the United States.
Right.
And so, for now, as you say, we are special in Canada, and so I still have a very, very strong feeling towards my friends in the States as you do. And a lot of times, what I say, even during my podcasting, I do a lot of flying, and if I fly around, Canada and BC in particular, we have a place in North Saanich. I call it paradise, actually. And I fly down and fly into the United States, and I always sit by the window in the plane. I say it's paradise. it's we are so fortunate.
Yes.
So, but even this again will end. The next thing that we will have, we'll see what happens here after today. But at the same time, the midterm is in 2 years, and then obviously he's in the last term, although he likes to get another one. But
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I think too that the midterm elections are going to be a turning point. I think, but
yeah,
when he's gone, and I think he will be gone at the end of his 4 years, you wonder what whoever's coming in after that, what are they going to do? Because now it's a mess. Global relationships, trade relationships are blown up.
It will take generations to change it.
Absolutely. Young people that went through this, maybe lost their job or got hit with high penalties, costs, and so forth. They're going to remember this as kind of like this didn't have to happen, but it did, and so that's going to be memories are long when it's personal like that.
Well, and if the as you do, but made you so successful in 50 years in the business and being recognized around the globe for all the things that you have is credibility, because there is nothing more important than that. And that, to me, what is important, and that's what I always believe is important for me, my companies. That's what builds, the relationships and going forward.
Absolutely.
And
we've lost that now with the U.S. There's no credibility.
No.
We don't know what's tomorrow or the next day or next week, and you can't really have a neighbor and a trading partner thinking like that, because now you're totally exposed, right?
And then the other thing that is amazing to me, Russ, is that so many of the Republicans, they support him even still now, where at one point there would be a balance maybe, but even if they know, and that's why they are scared to have these public meetings in their constituencies, because they are afraid of him. That's not healthy.
No, not at all. Not at all.
And at some point, people are going to say that this is not good for us, not for our kids, grandkids,
No.
and all the other things.
Yeah, we don't see the path ahead. Does he see the path ahead? It's all about deals and trying to punish people, and even his own people in America. They're going to get punished with inflation and high costs and unemployment. So what's all that about? And he even said when car prices are going to go up, and he says, I don't care. Well, he doesn't need to, he's not worried about money, but a lot of people are. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So just bringing us back, getting to the end of our podcast, is that how do you see things, considering all of that at some point gets to a sense of normal, hopefully, is that how do you see us going forward? That we have to become, government, in my opinion, has to develop strategic plans looking forward 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years. This is the structure in the plan that must include intensive forestry that, that helps for all the reasons that we already talked about, including forest fires and all the other things, bioenergy and all of those things. And then creating confidence in capital that will come back again and be attracted by entrepreneurship that believe, but it also starts with government, but it also starts with the associations that are meeting here today, like the Council of Forest Industry, the BC Lumber Trade Council, that clearly are must adjust. And what I'm saying to the northern operators in particular, be more proactive in terms of what happens, because in BC we got a situation where obviously the NDP is relatively speaking a minority government to a certain extent, and that they only have 2 or 3 seats in the Kootenays mainly, and then one on the western side here in northern BC. For the rest,
right,
there is no representation.
All urban voters, right?
And that then becomes even more important in terms of the communities here. And I say that to the city of Prince George: act like a leader. That you being looked at as leaders, be more proactive in terms of all the big projects are finished. See the pipelines, we likely will do more of them, but a lot of the projects are gone. We have government that had a major deficit, around $10 billion. When John Oregon left government, he had a surplus of $5 billion. Now it's 10 and probably another 2 on top of that, maybe even. So we have to have a government that has to realize that our bureaucracy is too big, and that we have to look at that not like Musk is doing with a power saw, but we have to look at it to become competitive globally, and then develop a structurally looking forward in a strategy 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years. What do we want to look like? We don't have to invent the wheel. It's all there, you know.
And I suppose, when I think about looking back at some of the governments in BC, the forest ministers, I don't recall a lot of strategic thinking or planning. It always seemed to be you had a forest minister, let's say, who couldn't get a job in the real world, so he went into politics, and that party won. And he doesn't have any skills, and so all he wants to do is get elected for the next election and build on his pension. So all he's looking at is short-term things, short-term goals to get him reelected, and not looking at the bigger picture. So I don't know if I've ever seen a strategic plan by government.
Right.
I mean, maybe some of the, like the Peter Pierce Royal Commission was sort of a start, trying to kind of open up the onion and have a look.
1976.
Yes, exactly.
And then the Sloan Commissions in 1945
Before
and
that.
1955.
Exactly.
And then H.R. Macmillan had a vision of looking forward and saying that if we go in this direction, the forest will be controlled by 3 or 4 companies in BC, and that's not going to be good for us.
No.
He said that in 1955.
Okay.
And I'm in the process of writing a book about the BC forest industry, and it should come out sometimes next year.
Good. But as you said, the last Royal Commission was 1974. Here we are, what is that, 60 years later? Aren't we due for something like that? Have
Exactly.
some, that's more of a strategic plan and trying to balance out the how the forest gets used and integrate value added in First Nations and primaries and community forests and all that sort of stuff. That's what's been missing. We don't have any strategic leadership in government.
No.
I mean, the current forest minister, Minister Parmer, is on the right track with his words, but how can he do anything when he's handcuffed by all the policies that he's inherited, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's tough.
And in order to attract capital, and a lot of capital is leaving, then we have to show that we have strategic plans going forward. No matter how beautiful the timber is and how all the opportunity location, if there is no strategic plan that gives reasonable expectation of profitability and being competitive globally, you will not have an industry.
Yeah, and I've seen, not to specifically identify this group, there's a group in government that's trying to do all that stuff, but they don't have any understanding of the industry or how it works or margins or capital. They're just floundering under a mandate, and I can't believe that this is the best answers the government has for some of these initiatives, right? And I just can't believe it, but that's government. And so I don't think this government, is going to get us anywhere. And I think we're waiting for a new government, and then they got to start all over again, and it's slow go, right? So it's really tough to win in BC right now.
Yeah.
Except for value added, that's the future.
That's where the future is.
Yeah.
I agree with that. Russ, it was amazing, and for all those people watching us from around the world to this podcast, the BC forest industry in crisis, big time actually. It was an interesting day for all the people to watch this podcast, because forest industry and business, very important part of my podcasting of On the Brink, and it gives you a view of some of the crises that we are dealing with and that globally people are aware of. It is the President of the United States was just before I started the podcast with Russ, we were waiting for them to make the announcement of what would the tariffs be on forest products sent into the U.S. market, which we depend upon, that potentially put our companies in jeopardy, and a lot of people would lose their jobs. So it was a very, very critical time, as it will be in other parts of the world. And it gives our friends watching us a different perspective of podcasts that I do normally. In spite of all of that, if you like what we are doing and you want to see more of a podcast, sign up on our podcast and like it and share it with others. Thank you again for watching. And Russ,
thank you, John.
I appreciate it.
Always.
Again.